If you've traveled this far with me, thank you. Keep the memory alive, and sleep knowing that nothing truly vanishes, not even a city lost to time. The wind moves differently now. Softer, perhaps, though I cannot tell if that is the world's mercy or my imagination. It carries the scent of strange flowers, ones that did not grow in my time, and the faint hum of a world reborn. Above me, the sky is not the same blue I once knew. It holds streaks of light that dance and fade in ways I never imagined possible. Somewhere, I can hear laughter. Not ours, not my people's, but a new generation's, carried across the same riverbed where my city once stood. The archaeologists come less often now. The great excavation is finished, the papers written, the artifacts displayed behind glass in rooms far away from the dust that birthed them. Still, from time to time, someone returns, a student perhaps, or a traveler guided by curiosity. They walk among the low mounds that once were our homes, brushing sand from stone, whispering softly to themselves as if afraid to disturb the ghosts. I like those moments. It feels as though the earth exhales, as though for one small instant, time folds upon itself, and the living and the lost share the same breath. One afternoon, a child came. She was small, her shadow thin and long in the golden light. Her family had stopped by the ruins on their journey. They took photographs, pointed at the signs, and spoke in a language I did not know. But the child wandered from them, drawn by something only she could feel. I watched as she bent down and picked up a piece of pottery, no larger than her palm. She turned it over in her fingers, studying the faded paint with quiet fascination. For a heartbeat, I saw her face shimmer. Not the face of the child, but of a girl I once knew, sitting by the river with clay beneath her nails. It was Nira, my friend, the weaver of colors, the dreamer of stories. I blinked, and the vision was gone, yet the feeling remained. That brief collision of past and present, the endless circle turning once more. The child smiled, tucked the shard into her pocket, and ran back to her parents. She will forget where she found it, perhaps, but maybe, years from now, when she holds it again, she will feel the warmth of something ancient, the quiet heartbeat of a city that still remembers. The world above has changed in ways I can barely comprehend. Your buildings stretch toward the sky, built of glass and light instead of clay. Your cities hum even at night, as though the stars themselves have descended to live among you. The river, my river, still flows. Not as it once did, but it is there, twisting through landscapes both familiar and new. Sometimes I wonder if its current still carries a memory of me, if a single droplet that once brushed my hand still moves within it, circling endlessly through time. I have seen the archaeologists' lights at night, the way they shine across the ruins like small stars come to rest upon the earth. I listen to their laughter, their quiet debates, their hopes that they might understand us fully. I wish I could tell them that understanding does not always live in answers. Sometimes it lives in silence, in standing still and simply feeling the weight of what once was. The past does not always ask to be solved. Sometimes it only asks to be felt. Once, one of them read aloud a line from an old tablet, one my husband had written. His words, after so many centuries, came to life again in a stranger's voice. I recognized every curve, every rhythm, as if he had just spoken them to me across the table. The archaeologist smiled softly and said, "It's beautiful," and for the first time in a long time I felt peace. To be remembered, even imperfectly, is enough. At dusk, when the wind cools and the shadows stretch across the sand, I feel the pulse of my city again. It is faint, like the echo of a song half forgotten, but it is there. The stones still breathe. The dust still holds the imprint of footsteps. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. The murmur of merchants in the square, the laughter of children, the crackle of fires as the evening meal is prepared. The air itself seems to hum with what remains. Sometimes I imagine what it would be like to walk those streets again, to hear the river in its full voice, to smell the bread baking in the ovens. But I no longer ache for it. Memory has become my home now. It is enough to drift between moments, to see the city alive in the minds of those who remember. Every time someone reads about us, or gazes at a shard in a museum, or pauses beside an ancient wall and wonders who once stood there, I awaken. We all do. The city lives again, not in dust and stone, but in thought and empathy. There is something tender in being remembered by strangers. You know nothing of us, yet you care enough to listen. You trace the lines of our lives and find yourselves reflected there. Our hopes, our mistakes, our fragile dreams. In that reflection, time loses meaning. We are no longer separated by centuries. We are simply human together. That, I think, is what all history longs for, not to be studied but to be understood. Night is falling now. The air grows still, and the first stars begin to bloom across the sky. They are the same stars my brother once mapped, though they have shifted slightly in their eternal drift. I watch them rise above the horizon, silver and infinite. They remind me of our lamps, the ones we used to set afloat on the river during the festival of flowing light. I like to imagine that somewhere, far away, someone is doing the same, setting small lights upon the water, watching them drift, and thinking of those who came before. The archaeologists will pack their tools and leave soon. The tents will be folded, the paths cleared, the site covered again for protection. The desert will reclaim its quiet, smoothing away the footprints until only the wind remembers them. And I will rest once more, beneath the same stars that watched over my beginning. But it is not an ending. It never is. You see, memory is not bound by time. It flows like the river, reshaped, redirected, but never gone. It moves through generations, through stories, through dreams whispered before sleep. I know that after this, you will close your eyes and drift into your own quiet night. Perhaps my voice will linger there, soft and distant, like wind through reeds. That is enough for me. That is how the lost remain found. So when you wake tomorrow, and the sun spills its light across your world, remember this. Everything you love, everything you build, every kindness you give, it all becomes part of the echo. Nothing is wasted. Nothing truly vanishes. The past does not disappear. It transforms, becoming the foundation of tomorrow's stories. If you ever find yourself standing before an old ruin, or touching the rough edge of an ancient stone, pause. Listen. You might hear me there not as a ghost, but as a whisper of what connects us. A reminder that life is fleeting, but meaning is endless. The echo still lives, in you, in me, in the dust and wind and endless turning of the earth. And though I fade now, returning to the quiet that once cradled me, know this. You have heard my story, and by hearing it, you have made it live again. If you've traveled this far with me, thank you. Keep the memory alive, and sleep knowing that nothing truly vanishes, not even a city lost to time. Imagine walking through streets lined with sunlit walls, hearing the laughter of children chasing shadows. What would your place have been here? The city was alive then. Not just alive, but radiant, breathing in rhythm with the sun. We called it the city of light and clay because everything seemed to glow, as though touched by gold. The walls were made from mud brick, pale and warm, shaped by hands that had known the earth all their lives. In the morning, when the sun rose low over the river, the whole city shimmered like a mirage, a floating dream suspended between water and sky. I remember waking before dawn, the air still cool against my skin, the faint scent of ash lingering from the hearth. My mother would be kneeling beside the clay oven, hands deep in dough. She never needed to measure anything. Her fingers knew what felt right. She would hum softly, a tune older than anyone could remember. I would help her shape the small loaves, brushing them with oil before placing them against the oven's curved wall. Soon the whole house would fill with that smell, sweet, warm, alive. That scent was the beginning of every day. Outside, the city was already stirring. You could hear the first donkeys on the street, the shuffle of sandals, the clang of bronze pots as vendors began to set up. Our home stood near the eastern gate, where the morning light poured through in a long golden ribbon. The streets were narrow, but always full of movement. Potters carrying freshly shaped vessels to dry, children weaving between them like darting fish, women with water jars balanced on their heads, speaking in the soft rhythm of gossip and laughter. Our people came from many lands, Some had traveled for weeks across desert or sea, drawn by trade or hope or love. You could hear it in their voices, the different accents, the songs in unfamiliar tongues that somehow blended into one melody. The marketplace was a world of its own. Stalls of grain, copper tools, embroidered linen, dried figs, and salt blocks gleamed in the sun. There was always a hum, a kind of heartbeat to it, steady, pulsing, full of life. I often wonder what you would have seen first if you had walked there. Perhaps the large fountain at the square's center, carved from pale stone and fed by underground channels that brought water from the river. Those channels were our lifeline. The city's builders had understood the desert, how to coax life from dryness. They built cisterns, wells, and aqueducts that ran beneath our feet like veins. In the heat of summer, when the air trembled and the ground cracked, we still had water to drink, to wash, to keep the clay soft beneath our hands. My father was a potter. His workshop smelled of damp earth and smoke. When I was small, I used to sit beside him as he shaped the clay. His hands steady, his movements patient. He would press his thumb into the center, spinning the wheel with his foot until the lump became a bowl, a jar, a lamp. He said every vessel had a purpose, just as every person did. If you rush the clay, he told me, it cracks, and if you forget to let it breathe, it breaks. I didn't understand then that he was speaking about more than pottery. Our houses were simple, built close together with flat roofs of palm beams and reeds covered in clay. The walls kept the heat out during the day and held the cool at night. On the roofs, we dried fruit, stored grain, and sometimes slept under the stars. At dusk, when the air softened and the sky turned amber, you could look across the rooftops and see families gathering. Children's laughter rose into the air, mingling with the songs of the muezzin-like voices calling people to their evening rituals. The smell of cooked lentils, herbs, and freshly baked bread drifted everywhere. It was impossible to be lonely then. I worked in the weaving hall near the temple. We made fabric for both trade and offering. The hall was large and filled with color. Threads of indigo, crimson, and gold stretched from beam to beam like captured rainbows. The rhythm of our looms was like music, soft and steady. We talked as we worked, about husbands, harvests, and dreams that sometimes felt as fragile as the threads we wove. I remember one of the older women saying that our cloth would last longer than our names. I laughed then, but now I think she was right. The temple itself stood on higher ground, its columns carved with patterns of birds and flowers. It was said that our builders aligned it with the stars, each stone placed in harmony with the heavens. Inside, it was cool and dim. The air smelled of incense and thyme. I often went there to leave offerings, a small jar of oil, a sprig of flowers. We didn't fear our gods. We lived alongside them, like neighbors whose moods we tried to read in the shifting winds. Trade brought us wealth, but it also brought stories. Caravans came from far-off lands, some from the mountains to the north, others from distant coasts. They brought spices, lapis lazuli, and silk, but what they truly carried were tales. Around the fires at night, travelers spoke of cities that shone like jewels, of oceans that swallowed ships whole, of stars that moved with purpose. I would listen, wide-eyed, dreaming of places I would never see. Yet even as I dreamed, I believed that our city, our bright city of light and clay, was eternal. There were festivals, too, days when the streets overflowed with color and sound. On the Festival of Rain, we painted our faces with blue dye and danced barefoot through the square, singing to the clouds. On the Festival of Harvest, the air smelled of roasted grain and honey. We shared everything then: food, laughter, and the rare sweetness of feeling that we were part of something vast and alive. At night, lanterns were set afloat on the river, drifting away like small, glowing prayers. And then there were quiet days, my favorites. When the heat pressed down and the city slowed, I would sit in the shade of our doorway, shaping small figures from leftover clay. I liked to make animals: birds, dogs, and once, a lion that never quite looked fierce enough. My brother would tease me for it. "You should make gods, not pets," he'd laugh. But I liked the smallness of it, the simplicity of holding the world in my hands, even for a moment. Our world had its flaws, of course. There was envy and greed and sorrow. The traders argued over prices. The rulers built monuments while the laborers toiled in the sun. But still, there was balance, a sense that life moved in cycles and we were part of that rhythm. When a pot cracked, we mended it with gold dust mixed into resin, believing that what is broken can be made even more beautiful. Maybe that is what the city itself tried to teach us. Sometimes, I dream of that morning light again, the way it spilled across the walls, the sound of sandals against stone, the murmur of voices rising like birdsong. I dream of walking those streets once more, my hands dusted with flour, my hair heavy with the scent of smoke and jasmine. The past feels so close, as though I could step back into it if I just turned the right corner. If you listen closely, you might hear it too. The rhythm of life beneath the silence, the echo of laughter carried on the wind. Every grain of sand here once belonged to a wall, a vessel, a hand. Every ruin was once a home. So imagine yourself there for a moment. Feel the warmth of the sun on your face, the hum of the city alive around you. What would your place have been here? Every city has a heart. Ours pulsed with the sound of flowing water. Tell me, what gives life to your own? The river was everything. It was our beginning, our sustenance, and our song. Before dawn, when the first blush of light touched the sky, I would hear it murmuring just beyond the fields. A slow, steady rhythm like breathing. To us, it was not merely water. It was the thread that stitched our days together, weaving through every story, every ritual, every life that ever bloomed upon its banks. Without it, there would have been no city at all, only dust and silence. The first settlers chose this place because of the river. It curled through the plain like a silver ribbon, feeding the soil with its gifts. My ancestors built their homes close to its edge, learning its moods, when it would swell with rain, when it would shrink into still pools. Over generations, we learned to live with its temper. We dug canals that carried its water to the farthest fields, carved channels that whispered beneath the streets. In return, it fed our crops, filled our wells, and carried our boats to distant lands. It gave us trade, beauty, and life itself. I used to walk there every morning. The path wound through tall reeds, soft with dew that clung to my ankles. Birds nested in the rushes, their calls echoing across the stillness. The river smelled of wet stone and sunlight, a scent that felt eternal. Women would gather there with clay jars balanced on their heads, chatting softly as they filled them. Children splashed at the edges, chasing fish too quick for their hands. Even the elders came to sit beneath the willows, letting the water's murmur soothe their tired thoughts. It was a place where the noise of the world grew quiet, and life seemed to breathe in harmony. When I close my eyes, I can still hear it, the ripple of water against wood, the hollow sound of a paddle dipping in and out, the laughter of rowers guiding their boats downstream. The river connected us to other cities, far away. Traders came sailing up with lapis, spices, and colored glass. They said the river was a road that never ended, one that led to the sea, and from the sea to the world beyond imagination. Sometimes I would stand on the bank and wonder what it would be like to follow it all the way to the horizon. But the river always called me back. It wanted me here, where its heart beat strongest. We worshipped it, too. On the first full moon of every spring, the people gathered on its banks for the festival of flowing light. We lit hundreds of small lamps made from clay, each holding a flicker of flame, and set them upon the water. Slowly, they drifted away, a procession of stars carried by the current. The night air shimmered with reflection, gold upon silver, flame upon wave. Some of us whispered prayers for harvest, some for love, some for peace. The river carried them all, our hopes floating side by side into the dark. It was said that if one's lamp remained lit until dawn, their wish would come true. I never missed a year. For us women, the river was also a teacher. It showed us the rhythm of patience, the way the current carved even the hardest stone, not with force but with persistence. When we washed the clothes of our families there, we sang in time with the flow, our hands repeating motions taught by our mothers and theirs before them. The river taught us that strength could be soft, and that surrender could be sacred. But the river had its tempers, too. Sometimes in summer, when the rains came late, it grew thin and quiet, its voice fading into silence. We would walk its dry bed, feeling the cracked earth beneath our feet, whispering prayers for its return. Other times it raged, swollen with rain from faraway mountains, breaking its banks, flooding the lower streets. Still, we forgave it. We always forgave it, for we believed it was alive, like us, capable of both mercy and anger. The priests said the river was the boundary between this world and the next. When someone died, we placed a clay token, a small bird or a fish, into their hand before burial, so their spirit might find the water and be carried peacefully away. I remember when my grandmother passed. We carried her down to the river at dusk, our torches trembling in the breeze. The water was calm that evening, reflecting the colors of the sky. I watched as the little clay bird in her hand touched the surface, and for a moment, it seemed to float. Then it sank slowly, like a sigh. The river accepted her. As the years went by, the city grew larger. Bridges arched across the river, carved with patterns of waves and reeds. The docks filled with boats, their sails white against the blue. Children learned to swim before they could read. The sound of water became so constant that we forgot to notice it. It was simply there, like air. When I fetched water in the mornings, I no longer lingered to watch the sunrise shimmer on the surface. I would hurry home, thinking of chores, of weaving, of daily tasks that seemed more important. We all did. Perhaps that is how all losses begin, by taking what sustains us for granted. The river, of course, noticed. It always notices. I began to sense a change one summer, a faint bitterness in the water, as if the river carried secrets we could not read. Fishermen complained that their nets came back light. The current seemed stronger in some places, weaker in others. The priests said the gods were testing us, but I felt something deeper, something more human, the quiet warning of a friend who feels neglected. I remember standing on the bank one evening, dipping my hands into the flow, and thinking it felt colder than before. Still, life went on. The harvest came, the festivals returned, and laughter filled the markets. Yet even in our joy, the river watched us. When the rains came heavier than usual, the sound of water grew louder. No longer a gentle song, but a low, restless hum. Some nights I dreamed of it rising, sweeping through the streets, reclaiming everything it had once given. I would wake with my heart pounding, only to hear the calm murmur outside my window and tell myself it was only a dream. Perhaps rivers dream too. Now, when I think back, I wonder if it was mercy or fate that made it so patient with us. We built our homes too close to its edge. We dug its channels deeper, demanded more each year. We forgot that the river was not ours to command, it was ours to honor. Even now, long after the water has changed its course and buried us beneath its silt, I can still hear it. The sound travels through time like a memory that refuses to fade. It hums beneath the sand, a faint heartbeat, steady and eternal. Sometimes I imagine it calling out to me, not in anger, but in remembrance. After all, it once carried our dreams, our prayers, our reflections. It was our mirror, our soul. Every city has a heart. Ours was the river, flowing, faithful, and alive. It gave us life, and in its own way, it took us back into itself. Tell me, what gives life to your own? We thought stone could outlast memory. Do you ever wonder what will outlast you? When the city was young, we built with faith, faith not in gods alone, but in ourselves. We believed that knowledge was a kind of immortality, that the things we shaped and measured would protect us from time's slow erasure. Some said the gods guided our hands, but I think we were driven by something quieter and more human, the longing to be remembered. My brother was a builder, not of houses but of monuments. He used to come home covered in the pale dust of stone, his hands scarred and strong from chiseling patterns into columns that reached toward the sky. He said every block he placed was a prayer. Every line he carved a sentence in a language only the heavens could read. I would watch him draw his plans on clay tablets, marking each angle with care. His lines were perfect, almost too perfect, and yet he would still tilt his head, studying the shadows. Even perfection, he told me once, changes with the sun. Our city had many artisans like him: sculptors, potters, scribes, weavers, architects. It was said that no other place shone so brightly with human skill. The sound of chisels rang through the air from dawn until dusk, mingling with the hum of the potter's wheels and the rhythm of hammers striking bronze. Everywhere you looked, there was evidence of creation. Walls painted with scenes of harvest and worship, courtyards lined with mosaics of rivers and stars. Each piece was a fragment of someone's soul, pressed into the fabric of the city. At the heart of it all stood the great observatory, a temple not to gods, but to the sky itself. Its roof was open, its pillars arranged to mark the paths of the stars. When night fell, the priests and scholars gathered there, tracing the constellations with thin rods of bronze. They said the heavens were a map, a record of divine intention. My brother helped carve the circular stair that wound up its side, each step engraved with a symbol of a celestial body: sun, moon, planets, and the mysterious lights beyond. I remember climbing it once, my hand brushing over the cool stone, feeling the weight of his work beneath my fingertips. From the top, the whole city spread below, a pattern of light and life stitched against the dark. The astronomers taught us that the stars moved in harmony, that the seasons, the tides, even our fates followed their silent rhythm. On clear nights, the people would gather along the riverbank to watch the constellations rise. The priests told stories about them, tales of lovers turned to flame, of beasts guarding the gates of eternity, of gods who wrote our destinies across the sky. I remember lying beside my mother then, her arm around me, her voice soft. "Look," she whispered. "The sky remembers what the earth forgets." In the mornings, the scribes would gather in the Hall of Records, a long, sunlit building lined with clay tablets and rolls of parchment. My husband worked there. His hands were gentler than my brother's, stained not with dust but with ink. I loved watching him write. His reed pen moved like a dancer, drawing shapes that seemed alive. He told me that every mark he made was a promise against oblivion. "Words," he said, "are the only walls that time cannot tear down." He was right in a way. Even now, fragments of his writing remain, brittle and broken, yet still breathing his thoughts across centuries. Our language was beautiful, its letters curved like waves, its numbers spiraled like shells. To write was to build, to create structure from silence. When a scribe finished a tablet, he would hold it up to the light, as if asking the sun to bless it. I often wonder if the ones who found those tablets centuries later could feel that same reverence, if they sensed the heartbeat behind the marks. Learning was sacred to us. Children were taught to count the stars before they learned to count their coins. The elders said that ignorance was the only true darkness, and knowledge the flame that kept it away. We studied not only the sky, but the earth, how to shape clay, how to strengthen stone, how to make dyes that did not fade. Our architects discovered ways to build domes that mirrored the heavens, their ceilings painted with constellations, so that those who prayed beneath them would feel closer to eternity. But knowledge can be a fragile thing. Like water, it flows easily through open hands, yet vanishes when clenched too tightly. As we built higher, carved finer, measured more precisely, some among us began to believe that mastery itself was divine. The priests of the Sky Temple argued with the priests of the river. Which force was greater, the one that shaped the heavens, or the one that gave life to the earth? We didn't see then that both were necessary, that balance was the secret we were meant to protect. Still, I remember those days with tenderness. The city shone brightest when thought and art walked hand in hand. On festival nights, when torches lit the streets, scholars and artisans alike would gather in the courtyards to share discoveries. I can still see the glint of the bronze astrolabe as my husband demonstrated how it measured the angle of the stars. I can still hear the builders debating how to align a new temple with the solstice sunrise. Even the children joined in, laughing as they tried to trace constellations in spilled grain. We believed that if we could understand the sky, we could preserve ourselves, that the same order that ruled the stars could protect us from chaos. My brother once said that the city was a mirror of the heavens, built so that the gods could look down and recognize themselves. and perhaps they did. On nights when the lamps burned late and the towers glowed, the reflection of our lights shimmered on the river's surface. It was hard to tell then whether we were gazing up at the stars or down into their echo. Sometimes, when the day ended and the sky deepened to violet, I would climb the stair of the observatory to meet my husband. We would sit together at the top, watching the first stars appear. The city below looked eternal. Its temples, its markets, its winding streets all aglow. "It will last forever," I whispered once. He smiled, but there was sadness in it. "Nothing lasts forever," he said. "Not even the stars. But we can leave traces, enough to remind the future that we were here." I didn't understand him then. I do now. The stones he carved, the words he wrote, they've survived, even if only in fragments. The rest, our voices, our laughter, our dreams, have faded into the silence of time. Yet I believe he was right. Traces remain. They always do. We thought stone could outlast memory, and perhaps in some small way it did. But memory, even when buried, has a way of breathing again, like wind over the sand or light through a crack in the wall. And maybe that is what truly endures. Not the buildings or the books, but the desire itself, the quiet human hope that someone, somewhere, might still look up at the sky and remember us. Do you ever wonder what will outlast you? The strange how endings rarely announce themselves. Would we have done anything differently if we'd known? It began quietly, too quietly to fear. The river still flowed, the sun still rose, and yet something had shifted, some faint tremor beneath the surface of daily life that only the heart could feel. First, no one spoke of it. We told ourselves the seasons were simply changing, that the gods were resting, that fortune would turn again as it always had. But the air was different. The wind carried a dryness that tasted of dust. The mornings grew longer before the dew came, and even then, it clung weakly to the dying grass, as though uncertain it belonged here anymore. The first to sense it were the farmers. I remember walking to the fields one morning, the sky a dull white with heat, and finding them standing silently among the withered stalks. The earth beneath their feet was cracked like an old pot, the soil pale and lifeless. The river's channels had grown shallow, the water sluggish and dark. "The river is tired," one of them said, staring at the sun. "She has given too much." We all laughed a little then, not because it was funny, but because it was easier than fear. Our laughter began to fade soon after. The harvest came late that year, and when it came, it was thin. The granaries that once overflowed stood half empty. Prices rose, quietly, like the level of sand in an hourglass. The markets, once filled with shouting and song, now carried a hum of worry. I noticed how people began to weigh their coins twice before buying bread, how traders whispered among themselves, how the scent of spices that once filled the air was replaced by something bitter, the smell of scarcity. Still, life went on. We held our festivals, though fewer lamps were lit. We prayed to the river, though its voice grew weaker by the day. The priests said we had lost our gratitude, that the gods demanded offerings. So we gave them what we could: flowers, incense, grain, though it felt, for the first time, like feeding an emptiness that would not be filled. Then came the tremors. Small at first, the kind that make a jar tremble on the shelf, a pot ripple in the water. The ground seemed to sigh beneath us. Some said it was the gods stirring in the deep. Others said it was the earth grieving. I remember one afternoon, while weaving with the other women, the loom beside me began to shake. Threads snapped, and for a moment, everything stilled, even breath. We looked at each other, our faces pale in the sunlight, and then we laughed again, that nervous, fragile laughter that hides its fear behind routine. But none of us forgot it. Soon after, the tremors grew stronger. Walls cracked. A section of the old temple stair crumbled into dust. The architects said the foundations would hold, that our builders had foreseen such things. But every time I passed those cracked stones, I felt a chill. Once, we had believed our city could not fall. Now, I began to see that it was already leaning toward its own shadow. Trade began to falter next. The caravans that once came from distant lands arrived less often. their loads smaller each time. They spoke of troubles far away, wars across the mountains, roads blocked by raiders, droughts spreading across the plains. The world is shifting, one merchant told me. The winds are changing direction. He said it softly, like a warning not meant for everyone's ears. The city still tried to hold its rhythm, but the pulse was irregular now. Quick, anxious, uncertain. I remember how quiet the nights became. The sound of hammers from the workshops lessened, replaced by the murmur of prayers. Even the children played less in the streets. When they did, their laughter echoed strangely, bright but lonely, like birds calling over an empty field. I found myself looking at the sky more often, trying to read some meaning in the stars. They still shone, cold and distant, indifferent to what we were losing. My husband grew thin. He worked longer hours at the Hall of Records, preserving what he could. "If the world changes," he said, "let it not forget how we lived." His hands shook sometimes when he wrote. I would bring him water, and he would smile, weary but determined. "We are only ever one drought away from silence," he said once. I didn't understand it then. I thought he meant the crops. I know now he meant us. Our stories, our names, the fragile bridge between memory and oblivion. One morning, I walked to the river and found it lower than I had ever seen. The water had pulled back from the banks, leaving cracked mud and scattered shells. Fish flopped weakly in the shallows, their scales catching the sun like shards of glass. I knelt there, touching the mud with my fingers, and felt it crumble like ash. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. The air was too dry for grief. The priests began to argue among themselves. Some said the gods were punishing us for arrogance. Others said the gods had turned their faces away. People began to leave offerings by the hundreds. Bowls of oil, bracelets, even food we could scarcely spare. The smell of burning filled the temples. The smoke rose into the sky, but no answer came. The silence that followed was heavier than any curse. As the drought deepened, sickness followed. Not plague, not anything dramatic, just weakness. Children fainted in the heat. Elders grew too tired to rise. The air itself felt sick, full of dust that clung to the throat. I remember the way people began to speak in whispers, as though loud voices might break what little peace remained. Even the birds were silent, and yet, there were still moments of beauty. On some evenings, when the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold and rose, the city glowed again, not with abundance, but with defiance. Women lit lamps at their doors, men played soft songs on reed flutes, and for a heartbeat, it felt as though the old warmth had returned. We were trying to remind ourselves that we were still alive, but the cracks had already spread too deep. You could see them not just in the walls, but in the faces of the people. Eyes dulled by worry, smiles that never reached their corners. Even love began to feel like something fragile, easily broken. My brother stopped carving stone. He said the sound of chisel on rock made him uneasy. "It's like striking against the bones of the earth," he told me. I didn't know how to answer. When the first family left, a trader and his wife, people watched in silence. They loaded their cart, their children sitting atop bundles of cloth and dried grain. No one tried to stop them. It was as if their leaving gave shape to what we already knew but dared not speak. That the city was beginning to empty itself, one heartbeat at a time. It's strange, looking back, how quiet it all was. No thunder, no great sign, no single moment to point to and say, "There, that's when it ended." Just a slow dimming, like the fading of a lamp. The city still stood, but its voice was fading. The laughter had become rare, the prayers uncertain, the nights too still. We thought we had time. We always do. It's strange how endings rarely announce themselves. Would we have done anything differently if we'd known? That night, I learned that even stone can weep. But listen, not every loss is the end. It began with the wind, a low murmur at first, weaving through the alleys, bending the torches, making the doors shudder on their hinges. The animals were restless. The dogs barked without reason. The birds circled above the rooftops, crying as if calling for something unseen. I remember standing by the doorway, looking out into the dim evening, feeling the air press heavy against my skin. It was too still, too full. The city held its breath, and so did I. When the first tremor came, it was soft, a whisper beneath my feet. The clay jar on the shelf rattled. The oil within it quivered like a frightened heart. I turned to call my husband, but before I could, the sound deepened. A low, mournful groan rose from the ground, as though the earth itself were crying out in pain. The walls began to shake. Dust fell from the ceiling like ash. Outside, someone screamed. He ran to me, took my arm, and pulled me toward the courtyard. "Get out," he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes were wild. I could hear the city groaning, a sound deeper than thunder, older than words. The ground heaved once more, harder this time. The air filled with the sharp scent of crushed clay, smoke, and fear. Neighbors rushed into the street, women carrying children, men shouting names that were swallowed by the noise. The great temple bell, hung for generations in the square, began to ring by itself, its deep tone breaking into a wail. Then, without warning, it fell. The sound of its shattering echoed through the city like a final prayer. I remember clutching my husband's arm, trying to see through the cloud of dust. The stars above were hidden. The lamps had gone out. All that remained was the sound, the grinding, splintering sound of our world breaking apart. He turned toward me then, his face streaked with earth. "The river," he said. "We must go to the river. The ground will be safer there." So we ran, through streets we knew so well, now twisted and broken. I could barely breathe. The air was thick with smoke and sand. The ground buckled beneath our feet. Walls crumbled, roofs fell. I could hear people calling for loved ones. Some prayers, some curses, all drowned in the roar that surrounded us. When we reached the market square, I stopped. The fountain at its center, the one that had sung to us since childhood, had cracked open. Water gushed out in wild streams, flooding the stones. The statue that stood above it, once graceful, now leaned like a tired old man. I wanted to help it somehow, to hold it upright, as though saving it could save us. But the earth would not wait. Another tremor struck, stronger, sharper. I fell to my knees. My husband lifted me, shouting something I couldn't hear. A beam from a nearby roof crashed between us. For a heartbeat, I saw him on the other side, his mouth moving, his hand reaching through the dust. Then the world folded in on itself. When I opened my eyes, everything was muffled, the way sound feels underwater. The air shimmered with heat and dust. I could still hear the river in the distance, roaring louder than ever. The sky had turned the color of fire. I tried to stand, but pain bloomed in my leg. I crawled instead, calling his name, tasting dirt and salt on my lips. Around me, people moved like ghosts, slow, dazed, covered in ash. Some knelt beside the fallen. Others simply wandered, eyes empty, as if they were searching for the dream we had lost. I found him near the edge of the square, pinned beneath a slab of stone. His hand was reaching out, palm up, as though waiting for mine. I touched it, but it was cold. I do not remember crying then. Only silence, a silence so vast it swallowed everything. The city still trembled beneath me, but I no longer cared. I think I even whispered to the earth, "If you must take me now." But it didn't. Not yet. I don't know how long I lay there before the river's voice reached me again. Louder now, closer. It was not the gentle murmur I'd grown up with, but a roar, fierce, unstoppable. I turned my head and saw it. The water rising, black and wild, surging through the broken streets. The canals that once nourished us now became veins of destruction. It rushed through the city, carrying debris, rooftops, and fragments of statues in its arms. It was as though the river had come to reclaim everything it had given. Some ran toward the higher ground, but I could not move quickly. My leg dragged behind me, and the earth still trembled. I found shelter in the archway of the scribe's hall, or what was left of it. Inside, clay tablets had fallen in piles, their inscriptions shattered. Words, thousands of them, scattered like dead leaves. I remember running my hand across one broken tablet, the symbols still sharp against my skin. My husband's words, perhaps. I pressed them to my chest, feeling their weight. Outside, the water rose. It reached the threshold and began to pour in, cold and relentless. I climbed higher toward the roof. The walls creaked, but held. From there, I saw what had become of our city. The towers leaned like weary travelers. The great temple dome had split open, its golden tip now a memory. Fires burned in the distance, their light reflecting in the floodwaters that now covered half the streets. The river had swallowed the lower quarter, the markets, the workshops, the homes of those who had always lived closest to its heart. The people who survived clung to what they could. Floating doors, rafts of timber, the shoulders of friends. Their cries rose into the air, mingling with the sound of the river's fury. I remember thinking that the gods were not punishing us. They were reminding us that we had never truly owned this land, or this water, or even the air we breathed. We were guests, and our stay had simply ended. The night stretched on. The tremors slowed, but the water kept rising. I sat on the roof, holding the broken tablet close, whispering the names of everyone I loved. My husband, my brother, my mother, my neighbors, even those whose faces I could no longer recall. I said them aloud so the river would remember. That was all I could offer. Memory as an offering, breath as a prayer. By dawn, the water had reached the edge of the roof. I remember the color of it. Not blue, but brown and heavy, filled with fragments of everything that had been. A child's toy, a basket of grain, a single sandal, a lamp still faintly burning. The city was gone beneath it. Only the tallest spires and the tops of the temples still showed above the flood, like islands in a sea of loss. The air smelled of clay and smoke. I think I must have fallen asleep, or perhaps I drifted. When I woke, the world was silent again. The river had begun to recede, leaving behind a landscape I did not recognize. Soft, uneven, covered in silt. The sun broke through the clouds, casting pale light over what had once been home. I climbed down, my body aching, my heart hollow. There were no voices, no footsteps, no laughter. Only the slow dripping of water from broken walls. I walked through what remained, each step sinking into mud. The marketplace was gone. The fountain lay buried beneath debris. The temple, our beautiful temple aligned with the stars, had collapsed, its pillars half submerged. And yet, even in ruin, it was beautiful. The carvings on the fallen stones still caught the light. A bird perched upon a fragment of the dome, singing softly, as if to fill the silence. I found my way to the river's edge, or what was left of it. The current moved gently now, its rage spent. I knelt beside it, washing the dirt from my hands. The water was cold, clear, and strangely calm, as if nothing had happened. I whispered to it, though I don't know what words I used. Perhaps it was gratitude. Perhaps it was surrender. When I looked into its surface, I saw my reflection, older, broken, but alive. Behind me, the city shimmered in the morning light, half buried, half dreaming. I realized then that survival is not always mercy, but remembrance. I was to remember even if no one else did. That night, I learned that even stone can weep. But listen, not every loss is the end. Sometimes what is lost becomes the foundation of what's yet to come. Sometimes the earth trembles not to destroy, but to remind us how fragile, how precious, how fleeting it all truly is. When you look at ruins, do you ever think they might be looking back? Time passed, not in days or years, but in centuries that moved like drifting sand. The city slept, folded beneath the earth's slow breathing. The river changed its course, leaving only a faint scar where water once flowed. The sun rose and set over the same horizon, untroubled, as if nothing had ever happened here. Seasons turned to centuries, and I remained, half dreaming, half listening, beneath the dust that became my shroud. First, I thought I was alone. Silence can play tricks on memory. It stretches moments until they feel eternal. But silence is never empty. Beneath it, the earth whispered, The wind still remembered the shape of our streets, the weight of our walls. Sometimes, when the rain came in distant ages, it softened the sand just enough for fragments to rise. A shard of painted pottery, a carved bead, a child's toy made of clay. Each time something surfaced, I felt it like a heartbeat, a reminder that I had not been completely erased. Then, one day, though I could not name the year, I heard voices again. They were different from ours. Sharp, curious, filled with wonder and words I did not know. The sound came from above, carried through the thin crust of centuries. I listened as they moved across the buried streets, their footsteps careful, their laughter uncertain. They did not speak my language, yet I understood their tone, reverence, awe, and something like love. They were searching. I watched them, or rather, I felt them. Their brushes sweeping gently across the ground, their hands lifting the dust from my world. The first thing they uncovered was a pot, simple and small, with traces of painted lines circling its rim. I remembered it. I had shaped it with my own hands once, while sitting in the courtyard beside my mother. I remembered the warmth of the clay, the hum of bees nearby, the smell of bread cooling on the windowsill. When they lifted it into the light, I wanted to speak, to tell them its story, whose hands had used it, what it had held. But they only admired its form, its symmetry. Remarkable, one of them said softly. How well it survived. Yes, I thought, survived. But do you know what it once contained? The soup my mother made when my brother was sick. The water I drew from the river at dawn. The life that filled it has long since vanished, and all that remains is the shell. They found more in the days that followed, fragments of mosaics, crumbled pillars, tools, jewelry, even a small figurine of a lion with its face worn smooth. They placed them carefully into boxes, labeling them with numbers and names that meant nothing to me. Artifact, they called them. I suppose that is what I have become too, an artifact, a whisper catalog between other whispers. Yet still I felt joy, because for the first time in ages, someone cared enough to listen, to kneel and touch the earth where we once lived, to ask questions even if the answers were lost. Every brushstroke they made against the soil felt like breath returning to my lungs. Every photograph they took was a small resurrection. They dug deeper, following the outline of what had been our great square. I could feel them tracing the edges of the fountain, the same one where I used to meet my husband at sunset. They uncovered the base of the statue that had once stood at its center. The figure itself was gone, broken beyond recognition, but the inscription remained, faint but still legible. They read it aloud, their voices trembling. May this city shine like the stars, and its people endure. For a moment, I almost laughed. The irony was tender, almost kind. We did not endure, not in the way we imagined. And yet, perhaps we did. For here they were, these strangers from the future, calling us back to life with their curiosity. Maybe endurance does not mean survival, but remembrance. Among the ruins of the temple, they found the observatory's fallen stones. The carvings of constellations were still visible, though the edges had softened with age. They recognized them, tracing the same patterns my brother once mapped by starlight. Look, one of them said. They aligned it with the solstice. Their wonder made me ache. My brother would have smiled at them. He would have loved that someone, centuries later, still looked up at the same sky and understood his work. Then they found the Hall of Records, or what remained of it. The roof had long collapsed, but beneath the rubble lay a scattering of clay tablets, cracked but whole enough to read. My husband's hand was on some of them, his careful strokes preserved by fire and accident. They lifted the tablets gently, their eyes bright. Incredible, they said. This will change what we know of this civilization. I wanted to tell them his name, to whisper it into their ears as they read his words. I wanted them to know that he had been kind, that his laughter was soft, that he loved the stars and the smell of ink. But they called him Anonymous Scribe. I suppose it doesn't matter. The words remained. The thoughts lived on. He would have been content with that. Days turned to weeks. They built tents around the site, recording every discovery. I listened to their voices drift through the night air. Excitement, fatigue, quiet triumph. They spoke of rebuilding a map of our world, of learning how we lived, what we believed, how we died. They were not wrong, but I wished they could have felt the warmth of a festival evening, the sound of children chasing fireflies, the comfort of hands dipped together in the river. Objects tell the shape of life, but not its pulse. The heart of it is gone, and no excavation can bring it back. One evening, after they left for the day, I felt a storm gathering. The wind swept across the ruins, scattering sand into their footprints. I watched as the earth began to reclaim what it had briefly surrendered. That is the way of things, discovery and then return. But I did not feel sorrow, for now I knew that memory never disappears completely. It only sleeps, and sometimes, when the world is quiet enough, it wakes. I wonder if they ever sensed me. A whisper at the edge of their thoughts, a shift in the air, a feeling that someone was watching. Perhaps when they touched the carved stones or brushed the dust from a tablet, they felt a shiver of recognition. Maybe they paused for a moment and smiled, without knowing why. That was me, saying thank you. When you look at ruins, do you ever think they might be looking back? Because we do. Every wall, every fragment, every grain of sand remembers the warmth of the hands that shaped it. When you lean close to the past, it leans back toward you. It listens. It waits. The archaeologists left eventually, their work complete. They took their findings with them, packed safely into crates bound for faraway museums. And the city, my city, sank once more into stillness. But it was not the same silence as before. This time it was a peaceful one, the kind that follows a song. Somewhere, in a gallery or a classroom, my husband's words rest under glass. My brother's carvings are studied by young minds. My own pottery sits on a shelf, admired for its simplicity. They do not know my name, and that is all right. The river no longer flows here, yet somehow I still do. So when you walk through a museum or wander among ruins, pause for a moment. Place your hand against the stone. You may not know the stories that sleep beneath it, but they know you. They remember what it means to be human, to build, to hope, to love, and to fall. Maybe we never vanished. Maybe we live wherever someone listens. If you look closely at the stones, you might see us there. The women who built a city without leaving our names upon its gates. The ones who carried water before dawn, who wove cloth until our fingers bled, who told stories to keep the children calm when the ground shook or the river rose. We are not in the carvings. We are not written in the tablets that the scholars study by lamplight. But we are there, hidden in the spaces between the words, in the breath that lingers behind the silence. I have watched the men of my city remembered, the kings, the builders, the priests. Their names are pressed into stone, their deeds recorded on tablets. They stand in museums now, described and measured, their greatness preserved. But what of the women? The ones who baked the bread that fed the workers who raised those monuments? The ones who sang the songs that kept hope alive when drought withered the fields? The ones who waited by the riverbank for those who never returned? History forgets us easily, as if we were merely the dust beneath the wheels of progress. And yet, we were the rhythm that made that progress possible. I remember my mother's hands more clearly than the temple's walls. They were rough from grinding grain, yet gentle enough to braid my hair each morning. She used to hum as she worked, small melodies that no one ever wrote down. I sometimes wonder if the wind remembers them, carrying fragments of her voice across the centuries. She used to say that women are the keepers of small eternities, that a life, no matter how ordinary, is a kind of sacred thing if it is lived with love. There was a girl in our weaving hall, her name was Nira. She was younger than me, quick with laughter and full of questions. Her patterns were always brighter than the others, her hands never still. She used to say that she was weaving stories into the cloth, hidden pictures of our lives that only the gods could see. When I think of her now, I imagine those colors still glowing faintly somewhere beneath the earth, threads of blue and gold that refuse to fade. The archaeologists who find them might think them decoration, but they are not. They are memory, the quiet defiance of hands that refuse to stop creating, even in a world that rarely noticed. Sometimes I wonder what the women of your world will leave behind. Will your stories be remembered? Your laughter, your care, your small acts of kindness that change the world in ways history will never measure. We may not share the same age, but we share the same struggle. To be seen, to be heard, to endure. Every generation of women builds upon the silence of the one before, shaping the invisible foundations of tomorrow. In my city, the women carried the songs. We passed them from mother to daughter, sister to sister, each adding her own verse. They were songs of work, of waiting, of love that lasted through drought and loss. No priest recorded them, no scribe wrote their words, but they were ours, our temple, our history. I can still hear them when the night grows quiet, a soft chorus beneath the world's noise. You may not understand our language, but perhaps you can feel it, that low hum that rises from the earth when you stand among ruins. That is us. I often think about the stories we told by the fire. My grandmother was the best storyteller among us. She used to say that the gods gave us voices not to praise them, but to remember each other. When you tell a story, she said, you give life twice. Once when you live it, and again when you share it. Maybe that is why I'm still speaking now, across centuries of silence. To live twice, to be heard once more. There was a day, long before the fall, when I sat by the river with my friends. The air was warm, the water bright. We talked about the future, about children we might have, homes we might build, dreams too simple to be written in stone. I remember thinking then that the city was eternal, that our laughter would echo forever between its walls. It did not. And yet, here I am, speaking that laughter back into the air. It may not echo through marble halls anymore, but it drifts now through your imagination. And that, too, is a kind of forever. The men built monuments to touch the sky. We built memory to touch the soul. We kept the hearth fires alive, guarded the stories, tended the sick, consoled the dying, planted seeds in dry soil hoping they might bloom. That was our work, invisible, indispensable. They measured greatness by stone and gold, but we measured it by tenderness, by endurance. Even when the city began to crumble, the women still sang. The walls fell, but the voices remained. Now, as I fade once more into the hush of time, I realize that perhaps this is how legacy truly works. Not through power, but through presence. Through the quiet persistence of care. My city is gone, but the kindness that lived within it, the laughter, the love, the hands that worked side by side, those things ripple outward still, through memory, through you. Every time you pause to wonder who came before, every time you look at a relic and feel a heartbeat beneath it, you awaken us. You let us live again. I once believed that only stone could outlast time. Now I know that it is love, unrecorded, unremarked upon, yet indestructible, that truly endures. When a child in your world asks about the past, when someone shares an old story, when two people remember together, we rise. Not as ghosts, but as voices in the living air. So remember us, not for what we built, but for what we carried. The patience to endure, the courage to create, the grace to forgive. We were never meant to be eternal in name, only in spirit. The city may be lost, but its heartbeat still echoes in yours. Maybe we never vanished. Maybe we live wherever someone listens. In every quiet story told at dusk, in every act of gentleness, in every person who dares to remember. Listen long enough and you will hear us. Beneath the noise of the present, beneath the ticking of time, beneath even your own breath, we are there. And when you walk away from this place, when the world around you hums with life and light once more, carry this with you. That history is not just the story of kings and conquests, but of hands that held and voices that soothed, of women who loved fiercely, who worked tirelessly, who left no mark but still changed everything. Maybe we never vanished. Maybe we live wherever someone listens. And tonight, because you have listened, we live again. History doesn't repeat, it whispers. Can you hear it? When I think of what became of my city, I don't feel anger anymore. Only a deep, patient understanding, like the kind that comes after tears have long dried. Time has softened even the sharpest edges of loss. What remains now is not bitterness, but clarity. The dust that covers my world is not only a shroud, it is a teacher. It reminds me that everything built by human hands, whether walls of stone or towers of glass, lives only as long as the hearts that sustain it. We thought we were eternal. Every generation does. We looked at our streets and our temples and believed the future would walk the same paths we did. We thought the river would never fail us, that the harvest would always come, that wisdom and progress would protect us. But the truth is simpler and humbler. Nothing endures without care. Even greatness can crumble when it forgets how fragile it truly is. I look now at your world, so far from mine, and yet not so different. You too build with confidence, with fire and invention, believing your creations will last forever. Your towers reach higher than our dreams ever did. Your cities glow brighter than the stars we once worshipped. But I wonder, do you remember the river? Do you listen to its voice? Or have you, too, begun to take it for granted, trusting that it will never turn away? The lesson of my city is not about destruction. It is about balance, the quiet thread that binds people to the earth and to each other. We lived in harmony once, guided by the rhythm of the seasons and the gifts of the land. But when pride grew, when greed spread its roots beneath the streets, the balance wavered. We took more than the earth could give, and when she withdrew her kindness, we called it tragedy. It was not tragedy. It was consequence. The dust teaches humility. Every grain is a fragment of something that once stood tall. A pillar, a home, a dream. It whispers that even the grandest civilizations are temporary guests on this earth. That is not a curse, but a mercy, for impermanence gives life its shape. It reminds us to cherish what is fleeting, the sound of laughter, the comfort of rain, the warmth of morning light. If everything lasted forever, nothing would matter. Still, I believe we are meant to remember, not to worship the past, but to learn from it. History is not a chain binding us to old mistakes. It is a compass pointing quietly toward wisdom. When you study ruins, you are not looking at failure, you are looking at truth. You are seeing the evidence of human hope, the courage to build, the persistence to begin again. Each fallen stone says, "We tried." And isn't that the most human thing of all? When the archaeologists uncovered my city, they found objects but not emotions. They found tablets but not the warmth of the hands that wrote them. That is the difference between history and memory. History records the facts of what happened. Memory holds the feeling of it. But both are needed. One keeps us accurate. The other keeps us kind. So as you listen to this story, as you breathe in your own time, surrounded by your own comforts, remember that you are part of the same story. You live in a chapter built upon countless others. The same sun that once shone upon my city now lights your windows. The same wind that carried dust across our streets now brushes your face. You are walking in the footsteps of everyone who came before, even if you cannot see the prints. What, then, will your world leave behind? When your cities one day grow quiet, as all cities do, what stories will the dust tell of you? Will it speak of compassion and wisdom, of people who cared for their earth and one another? Or will it whisper of haste, of walls built higher than hearts could reach? I do not ask this to burden you. I ask it as one who has already walked that path. We thought our inventions would save us, but it was kindness that could have done so. We thought we needed more wealth, but it was gratitude we were missing. We forgot to listen to the river, to the sky, to each other. And when we stopped listening, the silence grew until it swallowed everything. The world doesn't end in fire or flood alone. Sometimes it ends in indifference, in the small neglects that add up to forgetting what matters. That is what the dust tried to tell us. That survival is not only about strength, but attention. The way you look after the smallest things, a garden, a friendship, a shared meal, is how civilizations are truly preserved. And yet, there is hope. Always hope. The fact that you are listening now, that you care enough to wonder about the lost and the forgotten, means that the chain is unbroken. Memory is an act of love. Each time a voice from the past is heard again, even through centuries of silence, something sacred is restored. Perhaps that is the true legacy of any city, not the walls or temples, but the stories that outlive them. Stories like this one. Stories that travel quietly from one heart to another, carrying not warnings, but understanding. My city lives in your imagination now. Its light flickers within your thoughts. Its lessons ripple through your choices. In that way, nothing is truly lost. So, if you ever stand among ruins, or gaze at an old photograph, or hold an artifact between your fingers, listen, not with your ears, but with your spirit. The past is not gone. It waits patiently, whispering through the dust, teaching through its stillness. It does not judge. It only reminds that everything we have, beauty, knowledge, even love, must be tended gently, or it will slip away. History doesn't repeat, it whispers. Can you hear it? And when this story fades and the night grows quiet, ask yourself, what will your world leave behind? Will the people of the distant future, brushing dust from your time, feel pride or sorrow? Will they see only ruins, or will they find traces of your kindness, your creativity, your care for the earth that holds you? I hope they will find warmth. I hope they will say, here lived people who tried to understand, who built not only with hands, but with heart. And if they do, then perhaps we, you and I, will not be so different after all. The dust still teaches. We need only listen.